Okay, so just to remind you that the recording is now underway for this session, but there are a few little things you need to know about that. So many thanks for joining me today. My name's Nicki Moore. I work at the International Centre for Guidance Studies at the University of Derby. I'm also quite heavily involved in the Career Development Institute. I'm a director there. And one of the things that's been a topic of discussion for a little while at the CDI board has been the notion of chartered status. And I was commissioned about a year and a half ago to start doing some research into chartered. And that's why I'm here, because I want to provide you with information today, but also to ask you some questions. But the thing that we're all focusing on today is whether or not we think career development should become a chartered profession. So this is how the session is going to work today. So we're just going to spend a few minutes providing some introductions to the research, and then I'm going to provide about a 30-minute presentation into the first phase of the research and to explain what we found, but also to introduce you to the current research, to give you some insights into some early findings, and give you an opportunity to ask me some questions about that. And when I say me, Hannah is also here from iCeGS, and may be able to answer some questions, particularly about the survey as well. We're then going to go into breakout groups, and I've got a slide where I've posed some questions here about chartered status, and I want us to think about the advantages, disadvantages, motivators and detractors for chartered status. And we will then feed back through kind of presenting all of the arguments at 4 o'clock. Okay, now at various points in this presentation today, I'm actually going to use a Mentimeter survey, and I've got the link in various different places, but you might want to take a second now just to get Menti up on your laptop or your mobile phone so that you can answer my questions for me. So this is the information that you need. So you need to go on to www.menti.com and put the code 91154311 into Menti. So as I explained earlier, this is both an information giving session, but it's also an information gathering session. Every time I ask you for information, I'm going to remind you that that's where you're giving me facts and what have you that will be part of the research. Now, you don't have to participate in any of that if you don't want to. And when we get to the discussion, you can drop out at that point, or you can engage in that just listening or what have you, but you don't actually have to give us your ideas and thoughts if you don't want to, and that includes the Menti surveys as well. If you don't want to get involved in that, you don't have to. There is an option which says prefer not to say. The information that I'm gathering here today from you will be part of the CDI sponsored research, and it will be put into a report, and it will also be shared with our project advisory group, and I'll come on and give you a little bit more information about that later on. When we do report it, obviously it'll be anonymised, your identity will be protected, and if there's anything that you say here or that you want to withdraw, you've got up to 7 days after today to do that. Yes, this is being recorded, but when we actually publish the recording, we're going to edit out any of the kind of feedback and conversation, so it will just really be the first part of the presentation that's actually presented. Okay. So here's another opportunity to get into Menti if you haven't already done that. Please make sure that you do. So I just wanted to start with a broad introduction here, and I think many of you, more probably so than others, but most of you will be aware that chartered, the idea of chartership, has been around for quite a long while. Now, FedPAC produced a document in 2001 which outlined the advantages of being chartered. But even this wasn't the first time. And in speaking to one of the research participants, they told me that even back in the 1980s, a previous president of the iCeGS, Terry Collins, had raised this and had done some work around it. Now, unfortunately, I can't get hold of his report, but if any of you have got a copy of that, I would love to see it, because obviously it could contribute to the literature review for this research. But certainly there were reports written around this topic then. At that point in the 1980s, as you'll remember, many of you, the sector was supported by several professional organisations. They all represented different parts of the delivery of career guidance services. And at that point, there was no one organisation which was in a position to petition for a charter. And that's the language we use here. So we don't just apply, we actually petition. And in petitioning, we have to put down some very strong arguments, as you'll see shortly, for why this is a good idea. Now, over the years, even though, you know, the kind of organisations have been interested in this, there's also been some suggestion that practitioners themselves are quite interested in it. There have been chats on social media where this has been discussed, and I know that the CDI's Big Listen surveys have actually revealed this to be the case as well. The CDI commissioned scoping research in 2021, and I did publish an article in Career Matters. You can see an image of it here on the slide, which actually presented that sort of findings from the scoping research. And if you haven't read that, certainly, you know, do dig that out. And if you haven't read it and you want a link to it, then please contact me and we can give you that. Having said that, a lot of what is in the article I am going to say today anyway. But on the back of that research, the CDI commissioned phase 2, really to explore this a little further, and that's the point that we're at the moment. So I want to start with a first question here. And I'm going to swap screens in a second so that I can get Mentimeter up. But I want you to think, using your current knowledge, I want you to answer the question, should career development become a chartered profession? Now, I'm actually going to repeat this question at the end to see whether people's views have changed. But I would like you to start answering that question in Mentimeter, and I'm going to try and... so you can see here that we've got... yes from quite a few people and not sure, but nobody's actually saying here definitely no. So that's quite interesting, but we'll see how this changes as we go through the presentation. Oh, we've had somebody say definitely no, a last minute answer. Anybody else want to complete this before we go on? Oh, I'm not sure. Okay, well, I'm going to stop sharing again and then share again. Okay, so what I wanted to do now is to start explaining to you about phase 1 of the research, and this was quite important because it helped us to understand the processes which were required to successfully petition. It helped us to understand the enablers and motivators and some barriers and detractors, and it gave us a realistic time frame. We did this using a desk-based review, and this explored the history and processes of petitioning for a Royal Charter, and we undertook 9 interviews with people who contributed their views, and the individuals that we approached for this were actually members of chartered organisations themselves, or in fact PARN. So PARN is the Professional Associations Research Network. They've already done quite a bit of work around this, and I was fortunate to be able to talk to people who'd got some expertise in this area, along with people from these organisations that you can see here who have got various experiences of either petitioning for or being members of a chartered organisation. One of the organisations, APM, the Association of Project Managers, have only recently gone through the process, and they were able to explain, some of the pros and cons for this. So, what is chartered status? Well, it's a term we bandy around quite a lot, but to receive a royal charter from the British Crown is recognised as a mark of quality around the world, and approximately 1/5 of professional bodies in the UK are chartered. But the history of the Royal Charter dates back to the 13th century. You'll probably remember the Magna Carta. Well, this was the first charter of its sort, and all of the other charters have stemmed from that. But nowadays, the chartered title is reserved for bodies that work in the public interest and which can demonstrate preeminence, stability, and permanence in their field. Professional institutions and bodies are examples of those. Dependent on having successfully petitioned for a Royal Charter, it's an instrument of incorporation. It's granted by the Queen, and it confers independent legal personality on an organisation. It defines its objectives, constitution, and powers to govern its own affairs. So a way of thinking about having a Royal Charter is that it is one way of what's the word I'm looking for? It's just gone straight out of my mind. It's a form of governance, if you like. It's a regulation of that. In the United Kingdom, chartered titles may only be awarded by institutions that have been incorporated under the Royal Charter, and it's the Privy Council that actually that you petition to. And they are actually quite seldom granted. So only 18 professional bodies were actually awarded a charter between 2010 and 2018. So it's quite sought after. We don't know how many actually applied and were unsuccessful, so I can't give you the percentage of success there, but what I was told by PON was that many try and few are selected. Now this is where it starts to get a little more complicated, because actually there are 3 types of chartered status, and I want you to think carefully about these. So the first type of chartered status is a chartered body, and in our case it would be one chartered body for the whole of the career development profession. We'll come to what that means in a minute, but that is the image that I want you to hold. So one body would be chartered on behalf of the profession. That body, after a period of time, a minimum of 2 years, can then apply to grant its own corporate charters, and it can also apply to grant individual charters. So in effect, bodies could become chartered members of the chartered body, and individuals could also be chartered in their own right. So whatever we decided to call ourselves, you could have chartered career development professionals. Now, there are lots and lots of different types of organisations that are chartered, and as you can see from here, over the last 122 years or so, there have been quite a lot of charters, but you can see that varies year on year, and as I said earlier on, only 18 have been granted between 2010 and 2018. So this little chart just gives you an idea of what we're up against if we do decide to go forward with this. So what is the process of becoming a chartered body? Now, any organisation wishing to petition has to demonstrate the following. So the organisation should comprise members of a unique profession and should have as members most of the eligible field for membership without significant overlap with other bodies. Now, in just reading that, I think it implies some difficulties for us because we are not a sector which has one representative professional body. And also there's no one organisation which professes to have the majority of members for the sector. So we can see instantly that there would be an overlap between some other bodies. And certainly, to name but a few, Institute of Employability Professionals, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, AGCAS, and quite a few others have also got members who kind of overlap with the work that the CDI does, for example. So members of institutions applying for corporate chartership, so they're the people who, the bodies that then apply to the chartered body, the members of those organisations should be qualified to at least first degree level in a relevant discipline. So that's not the overarching body, they're the companies that apply then to become chartered. And the institution that does go for the overarching charter should be able to demonstrate that it's financially sound and demonstrate a track record of achievement over a number of years. Now, that I don't think would be a particularly difficult thing to prove, but I think the fourth bullet point here is the one that interests and concerns me the absolute most, and this is that there needs to be a convincing case that it would be in the public interest to regulate the body in this way. Now, we've got a lot of growing evidence that career guidance has an impact at various different levels, school-based, personal guidance and what have you, but I am not aware of any specific research, and if anybody does know any of this research, then please contact me because I'd like to see it, but which suggests what the public interests would be in us becoming chartered. So that will probably be another piece of research which will need to be carried out, because in petitioning we are going to have to be completely clear why this is a good idea and why it brings value to money, value for money, quality, etc. to the public, and that they understand and are interested in that. So not only do we think it, but that the public actually believes this to be the case as well. So the process is a complicated one, and because it's a form of regulation, whichever body takes this forward will have to, if it's already in existence, of course, will have to consider its governance arrangements, for example, because this is a form of regulation. So I mean, going back to the drawing board and revisiting all of that. I think that, as I said, a lot of the criteria there wouldn't be too difficult, for example, for the CDI to meet. But I think the research that demonstrates public interest would need to be conducted. I think we need to think very hard about a model which might work for all of the interests of the stakeholders. And having done all of that work, revisioning ourselves, talking about what we're called, all of those things which would need to happen across the whole sector, we could do all of that work and we could petition for a royal charter, and we might not even be successful. So there's no guarantees of this. And I think, having spoken to the other professional bodies that have been through this, this isn't a quick fix. This is a 10-year plan, which will require an awful lot of negotiation, planning, more research, and then the process of actually creating the petition itself. And at some point we're going to have to alert the Privy Council to this as something that we will be interested in, if indeed that's what we agree to do. So, you know, it's a long-term plan. It's not something that we're going to fix quickly, and nor should it be, I think, because given the complexity of this, I think we need to make sure that we take everybody along, and that we're really keen to get it right first time. If we were to fail in our first petition, you can repetition, and obviously you might learn quite a lot from a failure, but we'd hope we wouldn't actually get to that point. So I just want to go through the types of charter again in a little bit more detail so that you understand the complexity of this, because when we talk about charterships, it isn't one type of charter, as I said. So we've got an overarching body, whoever that may be, that takes this forward on behalf of the sector. And then individual organisations, be they delivery organisations or other membership organisations, could then apply to that body in order to have their own organisational charters. That can't be done instantly. There needs to be a period of at least 2 years for that to happen. But it would be possible to have a kind of umbrella organisation with other organisations sitting underneath it that also have organisational charters. The individual chartered status is conferred on individuals who are deemed to be the top professionals in their field. So it's not standard that you just become a member and you're automatically given an individual chartership. There does need to be a process in place, but once you've gained that individual charter, is a real symbol of quality, of confidence, and a mark of trust. I think in terms of the individual charterships, I think it's important to be clear here that to become an individually chartered professional requires more than initial training. So initial training will provide you with capability to do the job, but competence only comes through practice. And somebody who's going to become individually chartered needs to be able to demonstrate their competence. It's an evidence-based approach. We've asked people how long it should be post initial training, and there's lots of different views of this, but certainly there should be a period of time between initial training and practice. That in its own right presents a lot of questions. What happens if somebody's only working part-time, they stop for maternity leave? There's a lot of questions to be answered about that, but certainly that view of that you need to be kind of in it to win it. At the point that you then apply for an individual chartership, there will be an assessment over and above the initial training. So whether you've got a level 6 or a level 7 qualification, you will still need to undertake an extra assessment in order to be individually chartered. This is probably going to be at postgraduate level. Certainly the results of the survey that we've got running at the moment suggest that a postgraduate level is what the majority want, but it also provides stretch to individuals. So for level 6 people, it does provide a really strong progression route. One of the things that we've noted from the stage 1 of the research is that people quite like chartership, individual chartership, to be part of an overall progression framework. One of the ways you can think of this, those of you that are maybe involved in higher education, is the higher education fellowships, where you can be a member, you can be a fellow, you can be a senior fellow, a principal fellow, etc. Now, some of the organisations that we interviewed in terms of charterships also have a similar structure. So individual chartership then becomes part of a progression framework, but it does include fellows And at the moment, that system doesn't. We do have fellowships within the career development sector, NICEC fellows, fellows of the Career Development Institute, but we don't actually have that as part of a kind of progression framework. One of the things that's also very clear about those individual charterships is that you don't get it for life. So because it's about competence, it has to have a period of renewal. And again, the number of years that takes place over has been responded to in the survey, and we've had everything from every year to every 5 years. I think the average is around every 3 years, but there's certainly be a process by which you have to renew. So it is possible for one chartered body to offer a range of individual charterships. Now, this is exemplified by CILIP, the Chartered Institute for Library and Information Professionals. You can be a chartered librarian, you could be a chartered data manager, etc. So it's quite possible to tease that out within the individual chartership processes. Our sector is complex, and in thinking this through, we might want to think about how that would look. So I've put some examples here. You could have a chartered careers advisor, a chartered careers coach, a chartered researcher, chartered careers information professional, etc. So it's possible to tease out the subtleties within our profession through the individual charters that we could potentially offer. Now, what I've outlined there is a complex process, and of course there's going to be a cost to all of this. It will be quite different from the existing register that the Career Development Institute currently has. It's an exceptionally rigorous process. It requires assessment, validation, and will be more aligned to the process which sort of surrounds the qualification in career development, but would be over and above it. So it's possible, for example, that universities could apply to be the organisation that does the assessments for individual chartered status. It could be that whichever body takes this forward has that process running. One of the interesting models that I became aware of was that I think it was the CIPD have mentors, so people who are already individually chartered then mentor people who are aspiring to be chartered. So that actually provides an opportunity for kind of people's own professional development through the mentoring process. And in that case, people's time was often given free, which is a way of cutting down on the costs. And there was also an example where the individual charters, when they were applied for, went to a board of individuals who reviewed them and then awarded them. So it wasn't left to one person to do that, but a board. And that board was made up of volunteers as well. So there are ways of thinking about how we could reduce the cost, but I'm afraid there's no getting away from this. There will be a cost. The renewal date, as I said earlier on, is probably going to be every 3 years, but there are some big questions about who pays for this. Certainly in the survey, we asked people, would you pay for it? How much will you be prepared to pay for it? Do you think your employer should pay for it? And we've asked employers, you know, would you pay for it or would you contribute to it? So there are a number of models. Employers are saying they would contribute, and people are saying they would be willing to pay, but when they actually see the numbers on the page, it might be a different case entirely. So most people would pay about £100 for it, and the reality is that it would probably be considerably more than that, given the processes and the quality assurance that needs to be in place. So the first stage of the research we set out as a SWOT analysis, and I just wanted to share that with you. So the strengths of chartered status are listed here. So one of the things that this could do and reinforce is a virtuous circle of reflective practice, continuing professional development, and a process which develops and showcases critical thinking and analytical skills. It could create motivation for CPD. And one of the things that I learned was that some organisations include individual charterships, and as part of the progression framework, they include those targets in annual appraisals and career conversations. Chartership provides reassurance that there's a commitment to good practice. It can stimulate the introduction of new and developing practices, and it can create an appetite for the development of future mentors for more junior staff. And so it's an investment in staff development. For any organisation that's actually considering competitive tendering, if you've got a charter, and this would go for any individuals as well, it would give you a competitive edge in those tenders. Now, the weaknesses, the costs. Now, I've mentioned the costs for individuals, but there's also a cost for any organisation that takes this forward. So I mentioned the research, and so far the CDI have sponsored 2 phases of the research, but there will be more research that's needed. And then, of course, there'll be the cost of pulling the petition together, all the meetings that are going to be involved, the cross-sectoral meetings, negotiations, etc. So, you know, that is a cost, and we shouldn't ignore that. Of course, there's going to be a lot of resources required setting this all up. So thinking about the quality standards that are going to be required, getting agreement across the sector, and then managing and quality assuring the applications for individual and corporate charters. And then, of course, we've mentioned the costs and resources for individuals thinking about going for an individual charter as well. Opportunities then, well, already I think what we've seen is that even just discussing this is allowing us to reach out to new people. So the current survey that we've got running at the moment has demonstrated that there's international appetite for this as well. And I know we've got Bella here from Canada, but certainly there's been quite an appetite in Canada. They're looking at professionalisation of the sector there as well. But we've also had a variety of other countries answering the survey. So already we're reaching out, but equally, and I'll show you in a minute the types of organisation that have been responding. People are very interested in this, and it's generating a lot of cross-sector discussion. And of course, it is allowing us to work with our existing colleagues and to strengthen those partnerships. And I've been very keen right from the get-go to make sure that, you know, people are involved in the research, and we have a research advisory group, which I'll introduce you to in a minute. But we've really tried to extend the conversation. And I think ultimately this is going to allow us to engage with policymakers and the UK devolved governments to demonstrate the importance of career development activities which support their variety of agenda, really. But of course, in thinking about whether we take this forward, another complexity is that this has to be a UK-wide development, and so we've got to make sure that it suits our Welsh colleagues, Scottish colleagues, and colleagues in Northern Ireland as well. I think for me, another opportunity will be that working together with all of our colleagues, we can set out a really clear vision of what it means to be a professional working in the career development sector. We often refer to the variety, the plethora of different job titles we all have. There is a lack of clarity about what it is we do, and certainly in the education sector at the moment, you know, there's a lot of conversation about a lack of recognition and understanding about what we do, and this being reflected in poor remuneration, for example, poor terms and conditions. So this is an opportunity for us to set our stall out and to have a really strong communications plan to the public, the government, and everybody else about what it is we are, who we are, and what we do, why we do it, and what the impact is. Finally, the threats. I think there are some threats here, and obviously the first one here, a reputational damage which could result from an unsuccessful petition. So we build a lot of people's hopes up about this. If we're not successful, you know, people will feel very frustrated. And I know, looking at some social media comments, that people have said, oh, well, we've been around this before, it never went anywhere, why will this be different? We don't want to let people down. So we need to manage expectation. But if we are unsuccessful, you know, we might make people cross with us. Lost resources, as I say, it will cost a lot of money to do this. And if we're not successful, it will have all been in vain. It could be seen as being quite divisive rather than pulling people together. I certainly hope not, and that's not our intention in any way, shape, or form. As I say, we're trying to take people with us. But some people may feel threatened by it, and we want to avoid that. And then there are some other kind of existential threats, I guess, as well. Things like changes in government policy or government, but also, you know, in terms of the organisations themselves. So there could be changes in board members, chief executives, presidents, and also changes in financial status or membership numbers. So these are things that we perhaps don't always have control over, but could in fact thwart us if we decided to go for this. So I wanted to move on now to phase 2 of the research, and having established what chartership is and what our chances of being successful are, we then decided to start to explore what people actually think about this. So, you know, do practitioners, stakeholders, employers, you know, what do they know about this, and do they broadly support the idea? What are their drivers for this? We also wanted to understand what people think it might cost and what they would be prepared to pay, and to think about that, comparing it to existing processes as well, and thinking about the professional standards, etc. So what might have to change in those, if at all. We wanted to understand the gaps in the evidence base so that we could set a plan of research together. And we also want to make some recommendations for next steps. So these are the aims: to explore and determine stakeholders' attitudes to chartered status, and to make recommendations which will inform the decision making. So we thought it very important, and I mentioned this earlier on, that we had a steering group who helped us to think about the research tools and whether the language was inclusive. They were really helpful, and one of the things that we did end up changing were the language that we used to refer to ourselves as practitioners. So there are various different job titles in the list. They also helped us to think about some of the questions around employers and what have you. So in that regard alone, they were fantastic. They've also helped to advise on and secure access to the stakeholder groups, and that has also been very powerful. And ultimately, they're going to help us to interpret some of the research outcomes, because we expect some of those to be quite nuanced, and we want to make sure that we're accurately representing everybody's views. So we'll go back and to that group and ask them to help us understand some things. And they'll also help to review some of the outputs to make sure that they're inclusive and collaborative in nature. So who are the group? Well, of course, the CDI, but we've also got members from AGCAS, Careers England, Skills Development Scotland, Careers Wales, Unison, the NAHT, the IEP, the Institute for Employability Professionals, NICEC, Janet is on our group, from CRAC, from the CIPD, we've got a member of private practitioners, and we've also got a member from the Careers and Enterprise Company. So I was thrilled that everybody stood up and said, yes, we'll be involved. And we try and keep everybody informed at least every 2 weeks, although occasionally it does stray, but we try and keep everybody informed of how we're progressing. They've been very generous in their support. So how are we doing? Well, we've got two types of research going on. We've got a survey, and we've also got a number of different qualitative investigations going on. So we've done some focus groups in Wales and in Scotland, and this one as well, and a load of interviews. But with the survey, we're really thrilled. Today, we hit 600 responses, which is thrilling, because often we've found in the past very hard to get career development practitioners to respond to surveys. But this one seems to have really galvanised everybody. Now, I've set my target at 1,000, and a bit later on, I'm going to share the survey link with you, because I'd really like to get that to be even bigger. I think the more responses, the more robust this will be. It will be a powerful piece of research in informing next steps, and we want everybody's views, really. What you can see here, two little graphs. The one on the left shows you where the respondents have come from. It's great to see that we've obviously got people working in schools and universities represented very strongly, but colleges are there. And you can see also that adult career guidance and development is also represented. We've got private sector there as well, local authority, and a range of people who call themselves other. And often these are people who have described themselves as career writers. We've got members of the Career Writers Association, all sorts of folk. The one gap that we do seem to have is that we don't have any responses from head teachers, and this troubles me a great deal. Head teachers, principals and governors, and I think that this survey is the weaker for it. So these people are big employers of careers advisors, and we really need to hear from them. And I think what's actually happening is they are getting this through the NAHT, and then they're passing it on to their career leaders to respond. Well, actually, it is the head teachers or the governors that we need to hear from here, because we're asking questions about, would you pay more for a chartered individual than you would a non-chartered individual, for example? And their views are super important. So one of the things you can do to help us today is, if you are in a position, if you know anybody that is a head teacher or a principal of a college, then please ask them to complete the survey. The other little graph you can see here is showing you representation by the devolved nations, and we have got an awful lot from England, which doesn't surprise me. Good to see that we've got quite a lot from Scotland and Wales, but I would like to see those numbers go up a little bit more, and definitely from Northern Ireland as well. So again, if you have any opportunity to kind of share this around, then please do. The other there, 55 people have responded from countries all over the world, as I said earlier on. So here's the link to the survey, and we will be sharing the slides later anyway. And I wonder if I can put this. No, I can't do that. I was hoping that I might be able to put the link in the chat. I'll put it in for you later, or maybe Hannah might be able to do that. So that you can go straight to it, copy it into an email or what have you. But certainly, if you haven't already done so yourself, answer it and please forward it to your colleagues. So what are the headlines? Well, I don't want to share too much of the results because it's still a live survey, but I thought that you might like to see how this is panning out in some ways. So I think becoming a chartered profession is a good idea. Now, as you can see, agree and strongly agree by a long way are the majority of people's views. But there are a significant number there. Well, perhaps not statistically significant, but for me, 32 people have said strongly disagree, and I really want to understand those figures a little bit more. But what I can tell you is that both employers and practitioners are keen. People are sharing some concerns about the costs. People are generally happy to undergo an additional assessment, and most people suggest that it should be at a postgraduate level. Now, we have asked people, if you are going to be assessed, what kind of approach would you prefer? And most people have said portfolios and professional discussions. They're the most preferred options. But quite a few people have said observations of practice, which I think is quite interesting. And many people want a combination of all of those things. Nearly 68% of employers say they are more likely to employ someone with an individual chartership. So that was quite an interesting position. And we asked, would Chartership improve the experiences and outcomes for service users? And again, quite a lot of people are going, yes, they think so. There's quite a lot of people that are neutral there as well, which suggests to me that we really need to bottom that question. But then, quite a few people are saying that they disagree or strongly disagree that becoming chartered would change anything for service users. So again, we want to investigate that by looking to see which people are saying that. Is it employers? Is it people who are members of higher education academy or unions or what have you? We just need to try and understand that data a little bit more. But generally, it's starting to shape up into quite an interesting piece of research. Okay, right, I feel like I've chatted for rather a long while, and I hope that has been okay. What I wanted to do now is open it up, because I figure that there are going to be people here that may have been writing a few notes and have got some questions that they might want to ask. So I'm going to open it up, and what I'd like you to do is either put your hands up or put your question in the chat, if you like, and I'll see if I can answer your questions. I will do that. So have I got anybody that would like to ask anything to start? I can see Hannah's put the link to the survey there as well. Anybody got any questions so far? Did you all know all of that information about the history of the Charter, etc.? Oh, you're so quiet. What's going on? I expected to be a barrage of questions at this point.
Nicki, Janet's raised her hand.
Oh, sorry, who's raised a hand? Janet.
Yes, hi Nicki, it's Janet.
I beg your pardon, Janet. I can't actually. I thought I would be able to see hands raised, but I can't.
Oh right, no, if there's more than 20-something people, you can't see everybody in their hands. But here's my hand and my voice. So yeah, just to say, Nicki, how much longer have we got for the research interviews?
Right. Well, I had originally hoped to get the survey completed by the end of May. However, I am concerned about the lack of head teachers. So I am actually going to be doing some work with a head teacher forum in a couple of weeks' time, in the middle of June. So I'm probably likely to try and keep it open, because I think the research is poorer for not having their responses. So we will keep belting it out until I feel that we've got some response from head teachers. More than we've got at the moment, so it's probably going to be middle June now, I think. I'm due to report to the CDI board in July, so I can't leave it open too long. It might not be a perfectly produced report, but I do need to give some headlines at that point. So, you know, that there is an end to this. The interviews, I've still got a few people I'd quite like to talk to, but I think I've done about 8 interviews now. And what with all of the focus groups as well, it's shaping up to be quite a good number of individuals that have contributed on top of the survey. But if there's anybody here that's kind of desperate to be interviewed, then they can get in contact with me, and I'll be more than happy to arrange a chat. But yeah.
Great, thanks, Nicki, and thank you for all your hard work on this. I realise what a large project and undertaking it is.
Well, it's a big project actually, but one that's worth doing well. And yeah, I think there are a lot of people that are hoping, you know, that we could get some definitive answers and use that to make some decisions about what happens next. So yeah, okay.
The other question I had was, is the scale of the response sort of relevant in terms of sort of item 1 on the chartership requirement, that we are able to represent most of profession? Is there any kind of connection between the degree of response to the survey and the likelihood of us being granted it?
Well, I mean, the survey is great in that we have got quite a broad range. So everybody other than head teachers that I was hoping would respond has done. So we've got people from all different parts. There won't be any link between the survey responses and our ability to petition, but what it does show is that people are engaged. I think the question for us is how can we locate everybody so that whichever petitioning body takes this forward can honestly say they are representing the issues of everybody. That is going to be very, very difficult. It's going to require some phenomenal cooperation, stakeholder engagement, negotiation. You know, it's a bit of a minefield, but I think if everybody, what I'm hoping is that the research itself will prove that there's an appetite, and then I think that it's going to be up to all of the relevant bodies to make sure that they take that forward on behalf of their members. So yeah, I don't think by any way it's going to be easy, actually, but I do think we can do it if that's what people want us to do.
Okay, thanks very much, Nicki.
Okay, now then, am I seeing any more questions here? Well, I'm actually quite struggling here because I can't. So I've got participants. Can somebody help me here? Is there anybody else with their hands up? Because I'm struggling to see. I've got chats open and all sorts. I can't see people.
There's quite a few comments in the chat.
Is there?
Have a look.
Okay. Let's have a look. Oh, people saying, oh, that's interesting. Well, let me just see if I can scroll up. Okay. Oh, so this is an interesting question from Jane Artez. So what are the implications for not going for chartered status? I think at the moment we just carry on as we're going. I don't think we'd take any backward steps by not going for chartered status. I think the opportunities and the strengths that this offers us probably are worth considering, but I'm not sure anything. I don't think we would lose anything by not going for it. I think the opportunities for collaboration probably would be the thing that I would highlight as one of the benefits for doing it. I don't think anything would be damaged by us not doing it. Does that make sense? Maybe when you have your group discussions, you can think about that question. Thanks, John, for passing on the survey.
Nicki, David's got his hand up now. I just noted.
Who has, sorry?
I have Nicki, David Andrews.
Oh, hi, David. Okay, sorry, I'm really struggling with my screen here.
No,
David.
it's like, no, it's quite a challenge.
Yes, I've got a lot going on here, Mentimeters and all sorts. But yes, David, please ask your question.
I'm just in. This is an enormous piece of work you're taking on, and there's lots to it. The survey is of career development practitioners, then, who are being asked these questions, or their employers. I just wondered. I mean, there's another dimension to it which I'd be quite interested in know the answer to, is looking at comparable professions and to ask them whether it was worth it, or if they haven't gone for it, is it something they thought about and decided not to, or have they not considered it? I'm thinking, for example, of my own profession of teaching. There is no Chartered Institute of Teachers, and it's a comparable profession, because if we were to consider chartered status and these different categories that you said you could do under it, so you could have a chartered career leader, you could have a teacher who was a teacher but not a chartered teacher, but they would be a chartered careers leader. I'm just wondering, sorry, it's a long way of asking the question, has anybody asked the teaching professions why they've never considered being a chartered institute, or did they consider it and say it's not worth it?
I mean, it is an interesting question. I think there used to be the General Teaching Council, didn't they?
Yeah.
And that was the regulation of the teaching profession at the time. And I don't know, when they went, I don't know what took the place of that. I don't think any sort of professional body actually did. But that was certainly not that long ago, the body that regulated teachers. What we have done, for example, when I did the first phase, I talked to some CILIP members, and what I found there was that in universities, for example, a lot of the librarians had actually kind of let their CILIP membership go, and they'd started to become members of the Higher Education Academy, because that is the currency in HE. And so I incorporated that question into this survey, and what I can tell you is an awful lot of the AGCAS members, or the university HE professionals, have also got membership of the HEA, either as fellows or senior fellows. So it's about currency, that, and certainly the librarians felt that they were better placed to do that rather than continue with this CILIP membership, their CILIP fellowship. We have asked organisations whether it was worth it, and certainly the Association of Project Managers were very convinced that it was. CIPD told me that some members from the CIPD felt that certainly the kind of HR function had become more of a feature than the sort of training function. And there was a warning bell sounded for us in that part of the research, which said, don't leave anybody behind in doing this. If you decide to go down that route, you should take everybody with you that's part of the profession, and make sure that that stays the focus, not sort of let people go. So we did ask in the first phase, was it worth it, or has it had benefits? And generally the feeling was that it has. It positions people professionally, it raises their it raises people's awareness of what they do. What it doesn't do, and I can tell you here and now, there is a belief that if we become chartered, you can't call yourself a careers advisor unless you're a member of the chartered body. That isn't true. It doesn't ring fence a job title. Okay, it doesn't ring fence terms and conditions, so it will have no impact whatsoever. It's market forces that will determine the pay that careers advisors get. It won't be the fact that you've got a charter. It doesn't determine that. But the general feeling was it does raise the vision of the profession. It communicates very strongly professional standards, etc. And there is a feeling that the public trust somebody that's chartered more than they trust somebody that isn't. So I think there are some strong arguments in that way. That's probably a very long answer to your question, David, as well. Sorry, but
No, that's fine.
it's a complicated, very complicated topic.
Because it seems, I mean, you've done the research, I haven't, so I don't know, but it seems to me there's a hierarchy. There's those professions that are so high status they don't even need to be chartered. So the law society, the medical association, they're above that. And then there's the rest of us. One way of achieving some status is to become a chartered institute. But I'm just curious as to why some bodies that have been around for the length of time and perhaps longer, like teachers, whether they've considered it and not done it, or whether they've done it and decided and failed. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we couldn't get the data on how many have failed.
Yeah.
You know, what I can tell you is the chartered project managers told me that until they'd petitioned, they were not viewed particularly highly, but in gaining their chartership and working with the government, it then became something that was mentioned and a kind of requirement in tenders for people
Yeah.
to be chartered. So it certainly raised the stakes in that way. Okay.
I think Nicki
Okay,
alluded
Michelle, yeah.
to one of the reasons there. If you compare the Chartered Institute of Personal Development with the British Psychological Society, one is chartered and the other isn't. Certainly it has increased the status of HR professionals by the CIPD being chartered, but I'm not sure that it has increased its presence in the boardroom or giving it any greater leverage in influencing business policy or organisational policy. But it does, as I said, raise the status of those working in human resources and learning and development. And I think one of the reasons for that is that within that sector, there isn't a particular title, and none of those job titles are ring-fenced. So there's, like in the careers sector, there's a variety of titles, and basically anyone can call themselves a human resources manager. Similarly, anyone can call themselves a careers advisor. But if you've got that membership, then it gives you greater credence as an individual. In contrast, the British Psychological Society, the term psychologist is ring-fenced like social worker is. It's defined in statute and it's covered by certain parameters from the Health Council as to who can and can't use it. So it's possible that because of that, the British Psychological Society don't see any reason to be chartered.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I didn't discuss this research with the British Psychological Society for sure, and there are bodies who aren't chartered that are doing a very good job and have very high reputations. I think where career development is different there is that unlike psychologists, career development practitioners are working in such a diversity of different places, from community settings right up to university. You know, that it's such a diverse group. There are so many different outcomes that we're expected to achieve, so many qualifications. It's so diverse, and I think one of the advantages for this may well be that it helps us to review all of that and come to some conclusions about some coherence, which at the moment doesn't exist. And so, you know, I think in deciding whether or not to go forward, some of those questions we're going to have to answer. I can see somebody's question here, talking about the pros and cons of having another distinction between roles. I mean, I think actually I'm hoping that this would improve that situation and not make it even more difficult. The question at the end is good to hear that there's a focus on bringing everyone along together. If it is decided to pursue this, how might it work? Well, I don't think that's for me to say because I'm the researcher here. What I imagine may be the outcome of this is that the research advisory group, who are very involved in the conversations, many of whom are members of other advisory groups, national level advisory groups, will probably make that decision based on the research. I can only recommend from the research what might happen, but I think what the outcome should probably be is a cross-sectorial group that come together and work through all of the issues that this journey presents. So that would be the case, and I would imagine, as the CDI is the largest, the only one that's a UK-wide organisation, and in fact the survey so far overwhelmingly suggests that the CDI should be the body that at least leads the discussion. We'll probably review the outcomes of the research, and then we'll take some steps from that. But I think there is an absolute determination and a commitment that if this is going to work, then we need to take everybody with us. It's not one organisation imposing this on everybody else. It has to be a negotiated and worked through agenda. I'm just having a look here. Have you seen any obvious trends regarding reasons why other professions have failed? I can't answer that question because I have not been able to identify any bodies that have applied for this and failed. What I do know is that one of the organisations, again, I think it was the project managers one, did have a counter petition, and I think this is something that I need to explain. So when an organisation decides to petition, they have to notify the Privy Council. The Privy Council will then notify everybody, the world, I guess, through their website or what have you, that this is a move that is going to happen, and invite counter petitions. Now, it only takes one body to counter petition to cause a great deal of problems in the success of this. And in the case of the Association of Project Managers, it was an organisation in the United States that counter petitioned. That put their application, their petition, on hold for a while whilst they negotiated around the issues that actually caused. And in the end, they had to agree to award individual chartered status to members of that body on the payment of a fee, I think it was. So there was considerable negotiation around that. So in the end, they were successful. But one of the things that can thwart us would be if any one of the myriad of organisations I've named in one of my slides, if any of those counter petitioned, then I think you could say that we wouldn't be successful, which is why it's so important that we take everybody together on this journey. I'm just having a look here. There are risks. I think I have to say, when I started this piece of research, I thought it would be an open book case. I thought this will be great. Everybody will say, yeah, it'll be absolutely great. Why wouldn't we want to do this? But what I've discovered is that this is incredibly complex, and there are risks. There's no doubt about it. There are risks, financial risks, reputational risks, all the other risks that I named before. So yes, there are. I think what the recommendations will be a set of issues for the groups taking this forward to debate, discuss, and work through. And that will include the risks and maybe some of the ways that other bodies have overcome those. But I think you're right there. I'm just looking down. Okay. Right, so there's an awful lot about the BPS there. I can't really comment because I can't. Oh, this is interesting. So Siobhan has said the College of Teachers submitted evidence to the Education Committee about chartered status in 2011. Siobhan, do you know what happened as a result of that? I'm guessing.
I presume it didn't.
Well, yeah, I mean,
They,
but did it sort of say absolutely not, or did it say, well, these are certain things that need to be in place before?
what they did is they presented a written statement to the Education Committee, asking the Education Committee to support and recommend teacher status to be chartered. I think there's another bit of investigation to do to find out what happened after that. But they laid out, a claim about the benefits. I'll drop you the link, Nicki, so you can have a look and see what you think.
Thank you. Yeah, please do. I mean, and if anybody else has got any links that will give us a little insights into this stuff as well, then that'd be great. Again, if anybody's got that original report by Terry Collins as well, that would be so handy to have a look at. Unfortunately, Terry is no longer in a position to be able to hunt that out himself, so he can't send it to me. But if anybody's got it, that would be good. Okay, right. So very shortly, let me just find out where we are again. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, very shortly, I'm going to ask Michael to put us into breakout groups. And the important thing here is that you have an opportunity to discuss some of the issues that this presentation has raised. And of course, in presenting back at the end of the discussion groups, we will be taking down this information, and this will be data that you are providing into the research. We've also got people that will be in the focus group. So I'll be in one, Siobhan is going to be in another, Hannah is going to be in another, and we're going to have one focus group without one of the research team as a member, but those people will be taking notes on the discussion that's happening and kind of, just clarifying points that people are raising as well. In the focus group where one of us isn't, if that makes sense, I'd be really grateful if somebody could take those notes. So you just have to photograph them and send them to me so I can put them into our machinations. But if you could do that would be super helpful. So what I need you to discuss is this. Okay. So in your groups, and you might want to take a photograph of this slide so that when you go into your groups, you don't lose the questions. I want you to discuss the benefits and motivators of for us going for a petition for chartered status. But I want you to think about this really carefully for the following groups. So for individual practitioners, for people who employ practitioners, for service users, for the government, and for the career development sector as a whole. These are all kind of groups whose interests we will need to represent in any petition. And so starting to shape the arguments around this will be really important. But I also need us to think about the barriers and detractors for those groups as well. And again, we will need to think really carefully about these groups, because we will need to think about how we would mitigate those issues if indeed we were going to go for a charter. So think about the barriers and detractors. And then the final question is really around, given this is all going to have to be evidence-based, do you think there are any questions which remain unanswered that we would need to answer before we started to move this any further? So a list of questions would be super helpful too. Okay, so I'm hoping you've all had a chance to photograph this. And I would think that some of you will probably want a mini comfort break as well. You can take that in your group at the start or the end, I don't mind, or not at all, but I'd like you to discuss that amongst yourselves. And I think we will be coming back just before 4 o'clock And what I will ask you to do is to present your benefits and motivators, and we'll go through all of those and discuss those, and then we'll do the other side, the barriers and detractors, afterwards, and we'll discuss those. Okay, so Michael, can I ask you to break people down into the 4 focus groups, please?